Welcome! Today I'm going to be giving you a step-by-step tutorial of how I made this digital portrait right here. I hope you enjoy the video, and if you want to see more art content like this, I post twice a week, so subscribe! Alright, so we're going to go ahead and open a new canvas. These are the settings for my canvas. I'm using an iPad Pro with an iPencil, and this is the Procreate app. I'm also going to be using only Procreate brushes for this tutorial, so if you have the app, you should be able to do it with no custom brushes. I'm going to start by turning on the drawing guide. I like it because it gives me an idea of where the straight lines are and what angle I'm drawing at. That's kind of a personal preference though, you don't have to do this. I do all of my portraits differently. It kind of depends on just how I'm feeling or the portrait that I want to make, how I feel like making it. But for this one, I started out with a sketch. This is the Procreate pencil, and I'm just using black. And this one I like the best because it feels the most like a normal pencil for me. I started out with a really rough sketch and then lowered the opacity of it, added a new layer, and did a more refined sketch in the second layer. I try to be as exact as possible. This is probably the longest step for me. This and the hair take the longest, but I find that even though this is one of the longest steps, it's so worth it because once I have everything figured out exactly where I want it placed, it saves me so much time later. I don't have to go back and change things. Like you see, I moved the mouth up. That would have been such a problem to do once I had rendered out the whole face, so highly recommend. I merged those two layers together and I decided to go ahead and put in all of my midtones and my shadows. So I mostly use the airbrush for a lot of things that I make in this tutorial. I like the soft and medium airbrushes. I hardly ever use the hard ones. But I went through and I lined out where all of my lights and shadows are. It can be super messy, that's okay. Once I had my basics laid out, I decided that I want to work from dark to light for this piece. So I duplicated the layer in case I mess up. I have a backup there. And I took a black airbrush and went over the entire layer a couple of times just to darken it really well. You can still see where everything needs to go, so it's okay. But this way you can work into your highlights instead of into your shadows. A big tip that I will say is that I never used pure white in this video. Whenever I use pure white, my image tends to be too contrasted and I lose a lot of information in the parts that I accidentally do completely white. So I would use a really light gray and just go in, and again, this can be messy, just go in and find all of the highlights that you want to put in. Then I took the soft airbrush and I went into every part of the skin that wasn't even, which pretty much is all the parts of the skin so far, and I evened them out as best I could. I found that this was really nice because I did a lot more sculpting than drawing here, and I was able to shape and reshape a lot of the different planes of the face as I did it. This drawing took me about 2 hours, so if it seems like it's going fast, it's probably because it's like being sped up a lot, but the parts that really matter are going to be in a couple minutes once we get past this beginning stuff. I really love Procreate's hairbrushes. They're under the touch-ups tab. I usually like to start out by laying out the basic shape of the hair that I want with the short hairbrush, and then I go in and do some details with the flowing hairbrush, and then do my final details with the fine hairbrush. But they can be really flat looking, so I developed a kind of system to combat that. If you lay out a lot of details with one, like this is the flowing brush, and then switch to a large black airbrush and lay in the shadows on top of it, and just keep going back and forth and doing the hair and then the airbrush and the hair and the airbrush, it'll eventually build up some depth into your hair, as well as gives you the opportunity to figure out where you want the eye to be drawn to. So I decided that the face framing area of the hair here is where I wanted to go. So as I layered it back and forth, I tried to put more emphasis there, but I also was able to get a pretty good amount of detail throughout all of the hair. If you do have trouble using the Procreate hairbrushes, they are a little wonky. If you rotate your canvas around at different angles, it can help. It can be really hard to get them looking smooth, especially because they try to kind of move on their own a lot of times. So it just takes practice, and a lot of times I end up going in and doing individual brushes of hair with airbrush anyway. In a new layer, I'm going to go ahead and do the eyebrows. For this, I kind of blurred out the shadow underneath on my original drawing, and then I'm going to go in with the black hairbrush, or black fine hairbrush, and I'm going to add a gray hairbrush on top of it, and it gives it the illusion of individual hairs. Okay, so the step after this one is a little complicated. We're going to create the skin texture for the face. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and add a new layer, and I'm going to put this one underneath the eyebrows because I don't want the eyebrows to get this skin texture. I debated between the noise brush and the rough skin brush, and I decided to do both in 2 different layers. So to start with the noise brush, I took black and I covered the entire face. And I had to go back and erase where it got onto the hair. But essentially what this is going to do is, after we finish our black and white drawing, we're going to apply this to our drawing, and then when we add the color, it'll give the illusion sort of from afar of the skin and the pores, and it'll erase our brush strokes. So I went ahead and I put this on the soft light setting, and I also decided to change the opacity because I thought it darkened the face a little bit too much. But you can kind of see where the skin texture is coming through just a little bit. It's kind of like a charcoal texture, or what you would see in like a Brian Selznick graphic novel. I went in and I did a second layer, this time with the rough skin, and I had to make my brush really big for this. But I also had to erase this off of the hair, so if you haven't done this yet and you want to put the hair in a second layer, that would be a good idea. For me, it didn't really matter, so I just put them together. This is also on the soft light setting, and I changed the opacity as well. And then I ended up merging these 2 layers together because I like the effect of both of them together. And then I went in and erased where this texture would lay on the teeth and on the eyeballs, because I didn't obviously want a skin texture on her eyes or her teeth. In the future, I'd probably go in and add a couple of different textures for different parts of the face, but this is just sort of a basic overlay that I'll add on here in a minute. So I went ahead and changed the opacity of that layer to be 0, and I got rid of my duplicate that I made in case I messed up on the erasing there. And I ended up really liking the effect, so I would recommend trying this out. At this point, I was thinking that my face looked a little bit dark, especially once I add that texture on top of it at the end. It'll darken the face a little bit, so I went in and added some lighter tones to the skin, and as you can see, I didn't use pure white again, and I just went in with an airbrush. A lot of times I make a new layer whenever I'm doing something new, and then I merge the layer afterwards. That way, if I end up hating the effect that I make, I can just delete the layer instead of having to hit the undo button a ton of times. So our hair is really crisp, but the face is still fuzzy. I went in with a small airbrush. I made it really, really tiny so it looks really crisp in comparison to the other parts of the face, and I put in a lot of strong lines in there. The eye is usually in photography the focus of the photo, not the hair, and the fact that my hair is really, really crisp takes away from the eyes in this portrait, so I went in to make sure that I was satisfied with how crisp the face was looking. So for the eyelashes, I like to use either the fine hairbrush or the flowing hairbrush. This one I use the flowing hairbrush, but usually I use the fine one. I want you to know, if you're going to do this, the angle of your canvas is super important when laying down the brush. Like I said, they try to move on their own a lot of times, and they go in at the angle that they want to go in, so it's a lot of trial and error, so don't get frustrated. It takes a little while to figure out what angle to put the eyelashes in at. I exported my image and then I added it back in as its own flat layer, and then as you can see, I'm messing with the curve and giving it just a little bit more contrast so that way I can make it bolder and pop through when I add the color layer, which is what we're doing next. This is my favorite part. For color, I always use an airbrush. And if you don't have your entire canvas covered with your flat image, use a clipping mask so that way you don't accidentally get it on your background. Super helpful. I love clipping masks. But anyway, I just go in on the color layer, make sure it's directly above your flat layer, and you can start laying in skin tones. Again, this is sort of where you have to think about when you look at real life. If you were to do a color dropper on someone's face, it's very unlikely that you would ever get the exact same color in any part of their face. It's just that we perceive people's faces as being all one color. So go in and add as many variations of and intensities and values of different colors as you can into the skin. It'll help it look more lifelike. For me, I was doing sort of an orangish glow on her face, so I didn't use as wide of a range as I normally would. But what also helps is to use intense colors, so try not to do dull colors that have grays in them. And also, if you are getting super intense colors and you're not liking it, you're probably just need to erase that area on your color layer and then add back on. The more you add into the color layer, the more intense it gets. So it's kind of tricky to create skin that's not too intense but also is bright enough and saturated enough that you really like it and it matches the aesthetic you're going for. It's the same with the hair. You kind of see me putting all one color into the hair right now, but I did cut out a lot of me going back and adding different tones and different hues and intensities and everything into the hair as well, because like I said, hair is the exact same way. If you did a color dropper in real life, it'd be very unlikely that you would find the exact same color. So try to mimic that with your digital art. I always do my signature in a separate layer because sometimes, like something I did off camera by accident, you mess up and you have to go back and redo a bunch of stuff. I fixed a part in her cheek that you'll see just suddenly disappears in the next cut. But this way you can just drag it to the top of your layers. If you mess up, you can change that. Yeah, you see that part in her cheek? Watch, it just magically disappears between cuts here in a second. Isn't that just incredible? I also exported this into the Photos app on the iPad and made a couple adjustments. I don't normally do this because you can do a lot of similar things in the Procreate app to adjust your layers, but I wanted to just make a couple adjustments to my shadows and my highlights, and I didn't feel like using the S-curve again. It's just easier. I know this wasn't exactly a step-by-step instructional tutorial, but I hope that you took something away from it or found something in it that you want to try. I do have all of the raw, like unedited footage of me doing it. It took me about, I think it said an hour and 50 minutes to do. That includes my mess up with that darn cheek at the end. But yeah, so I can post that as well if anyone wants to see it. But yeah, so thank you all so much for watching, and if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe. I hope you all have a fantastic day.